We'll just go to the last text you got from him.
I did. I texted him.
So you got 4 now, sir.
Thanks. And sounds urgent. Okay. Well, good afternoon. I'll officially call to order the special meeting of Coachella Valley Water District Board of Directors on May 18, 2022 here in Palm Desert. And I'd like to make clear for the record that this meeting is being conducted as permitted under AB 361 and Board Resolution 2022-10. Today's meeting is presented in a hybrid format in person at CVW's Steve Robbins Administration Building and via Zoom. AB 361 suspends certain requirements of the Brown Act, allowing district board members to participate in person or by video conference. Members of the public may participate in person or via Zoom. Zoom details are listed on the meeting agenda. The meeting is streamed live on the district's website and YouTube channel. Members of the public who wish to comment on any item on the agenda or within the jurisdiction of the district will have 3 minutes. Public comment may be provided in person, via Zoom, or by emailing the clerk or the board. Such comments will become part of the board meeting record. If you're on Zoom, please use the raise hand feature to get the attention of the board clerk. And then as far as action, I'll make sure that we call on any directors who may be attending remotely to make sure that they are able to participate fully, and we will do votes by roll call. Right. And so would you please stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And roll call, please.
Good afternoon, President Powell,
Here.
Vice President Estrada,
Here.
Director Bianco,
Here.
Director Aguilar,
Here.
and Director Nelson will be joining us. Oh, he is on here. Director Nelson? He's connecting to audio, but I can see him. Director Nelson? We're doing roll call.
Yes. Can
Thank
hear me
you.
okay?
Yeah.
Yep.
Thanks.
Sorry to do that.
Good. All right. So we do have a quorum, and is there anyone from the public wishing to comment at this time? No. All right.
And then I don't see anybody on Zoom other than consultants and staff. But if there is somebody that joins us or is online that I'm missing, please use the raise hand feature if you would like to provide comment. Thank you.
Right. So we have 2 action items today. First 4A is a review of proposed rates for various funds. Jeff and Carrie, good afternoon.
Good afternoon. President Powell, members of the board, I'd like to review past actions. So May 4th, we brought you our initial recommendations on the budget and the rate increases being recommended At that time, we received board direction to make significant changes to the allocations and to be changing the interfund loan repayment assumptions in order to achieve a zero rate increase if possible, and where not possible, to keep it as low as possible. To that goal, staff was asked to present rate scenarios, including a zero rate increase for fiscal year 23 for each of the funds, and then to present alternative scenarios if that was not possible, to do a zero rate for 23 and keep the fund viable. Staff also included the latest low interest loan award information, such as the canal's irrigation projects and other information that came to light that had corresponding impacts to debt service coverage.
Hey, Jeff, I'm sorry, can you, is your mic on? I just received a message from one of our board members that they can barely hear you.
Okay, it's on, it's closer now. So further to that, we have our financial advisor, Darren Hodge, online from PFM. He's going to give a brief presentation on our current ratings and our recent debt issuances, in order to provide the board some context on our financial profile and our capacity to maintain financial flexibility and consider additional debt issuances. But before I turn that over to Darren, I'd like to bring up the bottom line upfront slide on what our staff recommendations are, just to remove anxiety or flipping the pages. So we are recommending a 2% increase for the canal fund, no rate increase in the west for 23, and 4% in the east, and then 5% for the domestic fund. So with that, I'll turn it over to Darren to give his overview. And then after Darren's done, Carrie Swain, our controller, is going to present the fund by fund detailed scenarios.
Thank you, Jeff.
Go ahead, Darren.
Perfect. Jeff, are you able to hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, perfect. Thank you for allowing me to speak today. I appreciate it, and I apologize there. What I wanted to do today was spend a little bit of time talking about credit ratings and focusing on one fund in particular, talking about how the rating agencies view us, why ratings are important, et cetera. Only because anytime we talk about rates or debt issuance, credit ratings are obviously a consideration. I'm not saying that it's the most important consideration when you're deciding. The only thing to put forth is make sure that you have all the information necessary. And from my perspective, is looking at credit ratings and the impact on credit ratings of our finances. So as your major decision, just want to make sure that you have the most up-to-date information from a financial perspective. So if we turn to slide 4, let's start with, what is a credit rating and why is it important? So rating agencies, and there's 3 main ones, Standard & Poor's, Fitch, they are third-party entities that provide an independent opinion on the creditworthiness of the district, which essentially means how likely is it that we're going to repay our debt in a timely manner. And so obviously there's different grades of ratings. And so the highest would be AAA. Those are your entities that are deemed the most credit secure. And on the investment grade scale, it goes down to BBB, which is essentially the securities that the rating agencies deem to be a little bit more risky. And so how are credit ratings used? Well, sophisticated investors and just investors in general use the credit ratings to help with their homework, their credit homework, and making investment decisions. So they may say, I can only invest in securities that have AA ratings or higher. They may look at the lower rated credit, but it's all part of the homework package that they perform. In addition, the credit ratings will determine our interest rate. So the lower our ratings are, the higher our interest rate will be. And conversely, the higher our ratings, the lower our interest rate will be. Now, what I want to point out is that they don't spike on the ratings that we receive. They will perform their own credit homework dependent of the rating agencies, but it is an important factor. So we look at the rate that we have on our three funds that have publicly issued debt. We have strong ratings. Our Water Fund has AA plus ratings from S&P, AAA ratings from Fitch. Domestic Water has a AA plus rating from S&P, and East Rack has a AA minus rating from S&P. So all very strong ratings. Next slide, please. So next, I want to spend a little time just talking about how S&P in particular, because they rate all the funds that have debt focused on S&P, how do they essentially approach water and wastewater utilities within credit criteria? And essentially, I've got this graphic over here on the right, which we'll go into a little bit more detail on, but there's two different components to provide a overall rating, an enterprise risk profile and a financial risk profile. Now, within these, the rating in the aggregate is going to be determined by a number of different characteristics: economic characteristics, demographic characteristics, operational and financial characteristics. Some of these factors we can't control, such as economic characteristics. Population growth, it's, for all intents and purposes, we can't really control that. Wealth levels, drought risk, etc. Those are factors mostly out of our control. The other important thing to note here is that within the components, no single one of them will determine. And what I mean by that is the rating agencies will, all these different components, they combine them together, come up with our overall credit score. And that'll make more sense when we talk a little bit more about our debt service coverage and our liquidity. But what I'm really trying to get across, we are big categories of rating on debt service coverage alone.
Darren, you're breaking up a little,
Yes.
so maybe keep closer to the mic and slow down just a bit. Oh, it's your internet connection. Well,
Is that better, Jeff?
Hey, Jaron, sorry to interrupt you again. Maybe try cutting your video because we can't display you. We're displaying the thing. So maybe if you cut your video and do audio only, that might help with your connection.
Okay.
Let's try that. Thank you.
Okay, Jeff, is that better?
Let's see.
it is now. We'll see how it goes.
Okay. Perfect. So should I start over on this slide 5?
No, you're good.
Okay. So I'll kind of resume with the rating agencies will take each one of these factors and combine them to come up with our overall aggregate credit score. Now, the other item that S&P is going to look at is not just how we rank within their credit scorecard, but also how we stack up against our peers. And so we've got some slides on that later on as well, which I will go through. Next slide, please. So next, let's take a look at how S&P evaluates our domestic water credit. We're going to focus on domestic water here for purposes of this presentation. So this is pulled straight from their rating report from earlier this year. And within domestic water, they identify as our strengths monopolistic service provider of an essential public utility, strong, sophisticated, and forward-looking management, an affordable rate structure, and strong liquidity and debt service coverage. Now, with regards to considerations, and considerations are more things that they look at and monitor to the extent that there's vast changes in these, we could see them coming back with additional questions. But what they have as considerations is, what are the projected spending increases associated with upcoming CIP projects? They're wanting to monitor our CIP plan because often large CIP plans, barring any very large increase in rates or outside funding, can often result in additional debt issuance, which increases our leverage, decreases our debt service coverage. And the second is simply water scarcity due to being in California with drought conditions. That's obviously a very important consideration for them right now. And in general, one of the other things that they highlight within their credit report is that they provided their rating based off certain forecasts and assumptions of what future debt service coverage and liquidity might be. And so within their credit write-up, they also indicated that if there's a material decline in either liquidity or debt service coverage, that could be a factor that would cause them to potentially look at a negative rating action from our AA plus level. But for the time being, we obviously remain very, very strong, AA plus, which is the second highest rating possible under the S&P scale. Next slide, please. So here I'm going to talk a little bit about the enterprise profile assessment. And so if you remember, there were the two broad components that they used to rate us, our enterprise profile and our financial profile. This is our enterprise profile. And what I show here is the 4 components of our enterprise profile and the weightings associated with each of the components. Economic fundamentals are the most important at 45%, and S&P indicates that the service area is very strong and it's very diverse, so a credit positive. Industry risk at about 20%, and again, very low risk here, just given our monopolistic service nature, and we're providing a public utility here. Market position, my apologies, 25%, and really this gets to the affordability of our business. And so affordable, and they measured this at about 1.2% in median household income in our service area. And then operational management at 10%. And these really identify the strength of management, our policies, our procedures. They also indicated these are strong and in line with our peers. So if we move to slide 8, now I want to talk a little bit more about our financial profile. So these are more of the metrics that we're a little bit more able to control in terms of the numbers from a financial perspective. And the 4 components within our financial profile are coverage at 40%. And you'll note here I've got this scale laid out that S&P uses to measure kind of where within the credit spectrum debt service coverage stands. And so within their credit criteria, they indicate any debt service coverage above 1.6 times they view as extremely strong, and anything below 1 times at the other end of the scale is what they call highly vulnerable. Then let's go to liquidity, which is equally as important at 40%. And they look at this 2 different ways. Days cash on hand, and they measure anything above 150 days as being extremely strong, and then anything less than 15 days on the other end of the scale, highly vulnerable. And then you'll also note that they look at the total amount of reserves that we have, and anything above 75 million in total, extremely strong, anything less than $500,000, highly vulnerable. And so it's important to note here that when we talk to S&P, we do highlight the domestic water funds individual reserves, but within that and how S&P looks at it, we also try to indicate to them, you know, there is some flexibility given there are other funds, and we can look at the liquidity of the district as a whole potentially to help address some of these needs. But it's important to note that the rating agencies focus specifically on the liquidity of the domestic water system first and foremost. And then the last item here is debt and liabilities. So this really kind of measures our leverage. And the strongest here is anything less than 20%, and we fall within that category. We're about 8% right now. And on the other end of the spectrum, the highly vulnerable is a highly leveraged system where that ratio is above 80%. And then the last here is 10% for financial management, which we rank very well in. So before I move on, I'll just pause here and see if there's any questions.
Yeah, thank you. You know, this comes as a bit of a surprise to me because I thought we had to have 365 days cash on hand, and this is saying 150. There's a big difference there. Why such a big discrepancy between what we've been?
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I've never heard the 150 till now.
So that's a very good and important question, because within this credit criteria, this is just what they're saying are the minimums for these various categories. The other thing that they will look at when deciding our rating is how do we stack up to our peer agencies. And so in a few slides, I'm going to show how we stack up on a national median basis, and then it'll become a little bit more apparent why we're targeting within our reserve policies a higher days cash on hand level.
Okay.
Darren, let me just also briefly add, as we've discussed with the board before, we know that the credit rating agencies, lenders, and anyone that's interested in our financials, they tend to look at our overall cash position as a fund in total. But we know we operate as a series of enterprise funds, each of which needs to be independently operating on its own. And that's why we have some significant differences from fund to fund. We have our 2 strongest funds, the sanitation fund or the stormwater and the sanitation, even state water project, they don't have as much flexibility for helping out other funds with lending needs. So when we look at overall cash as far as paying our bills, but we also tend to focus on fund by fund. Go ahead, Darren. Go
John,
ahead,
I have a
Darren.
kind of quick comment. You know, I know we're going to get into the details of each of the funds, and at least for me, one of the drivers for whether we decide to make rate adjustments, rate increases, is going to be that question related to where do we need to be with the reserves, and whether we're increasing rates to try to have bigger reserves and whether that's needed or not. And they all seem very different, you know, when you look at the different funds, east, west, domestic, now they all kind of fluctuate on cash on hand or base of cash on hand. And then particular for the east, you know, I think that one starts shooting up to like 400. And, you know, just, you know, that's concerning is, you know, why do we need so much of a reserve? So just in general, wanted to point that out. Thank you.
Thank you. And one of the things I'll point out is, to Jeff's point, when you look at domestic water, I was just pulling some based of June 30th, 21 results. And at that time, we had 236 days of cash on hand. And that was viewed as strong by the rating agencies, but within their credit review, they did indicate that if there was an expected or unexpected material decline in those liquidity levels, that would be cause for concern for them. And if we jump out of sequence here and maybe turn to slide 10, this will kind of give you a better idea as to why they were talking about that, and also give you an idea of, when I mentioned comparing us against our national peers, exactly what that means. So can we turn to slide
10.
Hey, Jeff, sorry, on my screen it's still showing slide 8. Are you seeing slide 10?
Yeah.
There we go, perfect.
Our battery capacity level is under target reserve.
So on slide 10, what we're showing here, these are the national medians for liquidity and coverage as calculated by S&P. And so up top here, what this shows is on a national basis, what are the median levels of days cash on hand for each of these different rating categories. And so as you'll see, right now we're rated AA+. For AA+ rated entities, the median amount of cash on hand is 600 days. And so if you get down to the level where we're at, about 236, still very strong, you'll see that that's further down on the kind of the credit score for that singular category. And so the further we move down that in terms of our peers, the more pressure we're going to see from a rating standpoint. Then if you move to coverage, that's the other important element. Debt service coverage below, at a AA+ level where we're currently rated, the national median is about 2.4 times. And at the time when we received ratings, you know, our projections showed that we were going to remain, expected to remain above that. And so any material change in those could potentially be concern among the rating agencies and might have some downward pressure on our ratings. So hopefully that helps to answer part of the question in terms of when we're looking at the district's overall target of 365 days cash on hand versus the rating agency's target, how those things all fit together. Did that clarify that?
Yes, that helps. It makes more sense. I guess the follow-up question would be, does the rating matter because we might potentially go out for additional debt, or does if the rating, let's say we shift somewhere on this table during the obligations that we currently have, what would that do? Does that change anything in our contract, or is that simply just because we might have plans to go after more money?
Excellent question, and why don't we flip back to slide 9, because that's where we put some numbers down to address that specific question. So with regards to our outstanding debt, we don't have a covenant to maintain any rating category itself. So in other words, if we were downgraded, there's no covenant that we broke with the investors for that. However, if we are downgraded, there's two main impacts to us going forward. The first is going to be the impact of the increase in costs to borrow. And so what I've tried to do here is I've tried to illustrate in this graph on the right what that cost is currently estimated to be. And so I've plotted out 3 yield curves. The first one is this blue line, and that's AAA GO. That essentially represents the highest of the ratings. These are tax-exempt rates, so the highest rated tax-exempt rates. This gray line, that's a AA rating scale. So that's going to be kind of more where we're at. And then at the lower end of the spectrum, the single A GO, that's one full notch below us from AA plus, well, actually more than one full notch. So down into the single A rating category, you can see those rates are much higher. The bigger picture here is that as our ratings get downgraded, as they decline, you're going to see upward pressure on our interest rates, which is going to increase overall borrowing costs going forward. And I ran a few numbers and just took an estimate of if we were downgraded from a AA category to a single A category, so a pretty big downgrade, what would that cost us if we were to issue $60 million of bonds? And that calculation came up with about $1.6 million of total cost. So that's the financial impact. The other element is that's what I was talking.
That's from a AA to an A, right? That's what we just said. Okay, so that we're not talking about that, right? I mean, we're talking about a AAA to a AA plus, right? Okay, so I mean, or AA plus to a AA. I mean, that's what we want to know. I mean, we're not even in a AA right now.
So from S&P, you are in the AA plus. You're AA plus rated by S&P. But your broader point is correct. This is kind of a broader example of if you had multiple notch downgrades from AA plus to AA. You're correct. It's not 1.6 million. It's probably $500,000.
And then you know, I really don't understand the public utility thing. I understand businesses, but public utilities, I mean, you just raise rates, right? To change things.
That's what we're trying to do.
Right. So I mean, if you get to a point, then you just raise rates up high enough to fix some of these problems, right?
If there's willingness to
I mean,
do
it's
that.
the only business that I know that you can do that. I mean, if you call it a business, right? So it's different than other entities
That's true.
that have to earn that money, right? I mean, we're not earning the money, we're setting the rates.
Yes.
Okay.
So I'm having some similar issues around trying to understand the debt coverage ratio comparison. So on slide 8, you're showing a debt coverage ratio of 1.6 times for extremely strong. I'm assuming that's a AA rating or better. But then on slide 10, you're showing the national median average for AA plus of 2.4. So what are we shooting for? I mean, I know higher is better, but what is realistic? And this is an all-in coverage number. So is that what our coverage number is now for all funds, 1.6?
So two very good questions. I'll answer the second one first. When they say all-in coverage, what they're referring to there is within their rating methodology for calculating debt service coverages, all-in doesn't mean all of our funds in aggregate. It's saying for water utilities, often we have water purchase costs. And S&P doesn't do this specifically for us, but for some utilities, they will take about a 33% fraction of that total cost and treat that as debt. That's what they mean by all-in coverage. So I just wanted to clarify that. So when they
Okay,
talk
thank
about
you.
coverage here, the way that they're looking at it is specific to the domestic water fund. The first question you had, which is a good topic to discuss here, is that within the credit profile, within their rating assessment, what they're showing on slide 8 here, kind of these different rankings for the different rating categories, is going to be kind of their guidelines, if you will. For here's where you would start out. If you don't have 1.6 times debt service coverage, you're probably not going to be in the highest tier of ratings based off this calculation alone. However, the other element of ratings that they look at is how to start peer. Because there's a lot of utilities that might have coverage above 1.6 times, and the rating agency that is, okay, within all of those entities, then we need to separate them out so that we can delineate who is the highest of credit quality, who's the next level of credit quality. And I'm not saying that I agree with that approach. It's just more that's how they approach it. And so that's why you see a difference between what's shown as extremely strong, or AAA here on slide 8, versus on slide 10, AAA, the median being 670 days cash on hand.
The median.
Did that answer your question, sir?
Some people even have.
Yes, thank you.
The other point I'd like to throw in is, so when we go through the fund slides, you'll see the different measures that we're looking at, whether it be days cash on hand, debt service coverage, positive operating revenue above operating expense. It's like we have these separate spinning plates, and for each fund, the weaker of those 3 plates spinning is the one we tend to focus on. So with domestic, I believe we're around the 200 plus days on cash for our recommended scenarios over the years. But the focus is on the debt service coverage. We're just kind of in that comfortable range where we're looking at. Canal, the presentation that we have much stronger cash on hand, but we're much closer to the 1.5 debt service coverage ratio we're looking at. So we're trying to balance all of these measures for what is going to be viewed in a positive light and where are we going to start to raise red flags. And this whole presentation is to say, none of this is driving the district to do business a certain way, but it's more to help us be aware of the implications of some of our decisions if we persist in a pattern of, a trend going the wrong way, how it's going to be viewed. Not to say you can't do it, but we just need to have our eyes wide open on the implications. Darren, I think you can go ahead.
Jeff, I have one follow-up question on that. Did you say that the credit agencies kind of blend all the funds to come up with a blended reserve for cash on hand and not necessarily look at the individual
They view it both ways, but I'll let Darren answer that.
Okay, so that's one question, and I wanted to know that because I guess I just feel a bit concerned when there's certain funds that I don't perceive, having to have huge expenses down the line. So if there's a scenario where perhaps some funds are being tacked on larger reserves with bigger, days of cash on hand, because it somehow, helps the overall blend. That seems to be a bit concerning to me. So I wanted to get a sense of that. If increasing the reserves on one fund that might not necessarily need the fund, because we don't foresee any real projects of that magnitude down the line, but are we doing it because we're just trying to blend it with the overall funds? Is that a strategy?
So Director, I'm more than happy to take that. I think the answer is going to address both the questions. So when S&P rates us, they will look first and foremost at the liquidity of the fund that they're rating. So in this case, we're talking domestic water. They will look at domestic water. Now, they do kind of take into account the fact that there is liquidity available elsewhere at the district that we could potentially use if necessary, but they do not give us what I'll call full credit for that. And so if we had a fund that was short on liquidity, then they would take that into account, saying, well, this particular fund may not have the days cash on hand that would support X rating. We do recognize that there is liquidity within the system that they could tap if necessary. And so hopefully that answers your question, Director. It's not as if we get full credit for the district's liquidity as a whole, but they do take that into consideration.
Yes, thank you, that helps.
And so that concludes my slides, but I do want to reiterate something that Jeff said, and I think that's very important, is, you know, what I'm presenting is really just to make sure that you have this aspect of the information. I'm not trying to tell you one way or another what the action should be or to kind of talk about policy at all, just making sure that you have the information and that you need with regards to this one component of our overall financial profile. So happy to answer any more questions.
If there are no further questions on the credit rating process, we can proceed to the fund-specific slides. Okay, Carrie's going to take over here.
Good afternoon, members of the board, President Powell. So this one we're going to start off, as Jeff had mentioned, so we are going to go through the 4 enterprise funds as requested in the last study session. And as requested, we are going to go through for each fund, the zero rate increases first, its fiscal impact, and then we're going to go through the staff rate recommendation. So for this slide right here, what it shows here is a 0% rate increase in fiscal 2023 and how it impacts the future rate increase proposals in the future years. So this recommendation assumes that we are going to take advantage of the USBR loan, the $68.4 million that we just got approved 2 weeks ago. So with that, then we are required to maintain a minimum debt service coverage. So President Powell asked about the range for the debt service coverage. So we are using a target of 1.5%, which is consistent to what the cost of service study was last year. They recommended 1.5% for us to maintain in terms of debt service coverage. So we are using that as a target throughout when we were analyzing, like what Jeff has mentioned, the buckets that we're trying to put together to make sure we meet all of these scenarios. So,
but you're assuming that the 68.4 million is
that we're going to take advantage of that loan. So if you,
which we may probably need to look at, because that's we're paying that back.
yes, we are paying that back. So if we
want to
do
make sure
take
that
it,
all those projects are, you know.
so if we do take that 68.4 million, that results in about $3 million a year annual in debt service payment for the next 30 years. So this is assuming that we are going to be taking advantage of that loan.
And we would be paying that debt service back next year?
Starting in 2023. Depends on how we draw the funds, but we're assuming if we do draw it, it's going to be about $3 million a year on average for 30 years.
Okay, and so it's not really up to us on when we draw the funds, right? I mean, it has to be, it's not that simple, right?
Yes, we have to finish the project. So as we complete the project, then we submit for a draw on the loans.
Which then takes time.
Which takes time.
Okay.
So let's go a little bit further in that and explore how long the loan is available for, because that will determine how we may phase in the projects. I don't believe engineering is planning on starting all 68.4 million projects on July 1st. So, you know, there's a phasing in, and the phasing in of how we make the draws is going to determine how the debt service needs to be paid back. But for budgeting purposes, you have to make certain assumptions.
Yes, we did.
But you would assume that we're not going to pay $3 million in debt coverage on $68.4 million because we're not going to draw on all that money in 2023.
Yes, so we're assuming that it's going to be in the future years. So like what Mr. Barrett has mentioned, so technically we don't have all the full agreement yet because this is something, a new program, not a new program, but they restarted this program, so we're still waiting for the agreements. But based on experience on other agency agreements, if once we do sign an agreement, we have about 3 years to complete the project for whatever we borrow. And then any money that we do not use within those 3 years, then we have to disencumber, meaning we disallow borrowing the rest of the funding. So that's still in the works, but at the same time, again, it depends on if the board decides to take advantage and push through with these projects.
So can I ask you a question on this? You said that this is something that we can go over later, but really we need to know these answers today, I think, in order to make the right decisions. So what is the interest rate on this loan?
It's 1.875.
So, okay, so incredibly low. And so if we didn't have that loan, and I think it's a good thing, you know, that it's been offered to us, what other designated revenue source would be used to pay for these lateral projects and the Bay Canal project? What had we identified as, I mean, we had it in the capital CIP program, and then we had to have a source. So what was the source?
Well, from what we're looking at, if we do not have this loan funding, then we're going to have to rely on, again, the rates to subsidize, so to pay for these projects, because we don't have any other funding source for canal except for the rates, and anything that we get through a loan or a grant. We can apply for grants, look at grants, and property taxes, discretionary property taxes that we're getting. But those are the only 3 main funding sources for canal.
I don't know that I heard you correctly, Carrie, on the repayment for this loan if we decide to go forward with it. When would we start repaying?
So if we start doing the project, let's say in 2023, then we start repaying in 2024. So we did kind of like an assumption that we start,
Right.
if we sign the agreement.
So this fiscal year that is the subject for today's meeting is not going to
It's not
affect this
included.
fiscal year?
No, there's no debt service included in 2023. We added it in 2024 forward.
Well, I know. So any decisions we're making over the next month or two are relating to the upcoming fiscal year. It won't affect any of that?
No.
Okay.
So it meets the operating revenues, exceeds the operating expenses, and it meets the target. So I'll go through the next slide, actually, so you can see the impacts of it. So this is the slide that shows your days cash on hand. And we talked about, we do have a strong days cash on hand for canal water. If you look at the all-in debt service coverage, so I'm sorry, I'm going to go back one more slide to kind of show you the rate recommendations. So it's 0% in 2023, but we have to do 2.6 in 2024, 9% in 2025, 2.8 in 2026, and 3% to meet that minimum 1.5 debt coverage in the future years. So having a zero rate increase in fiscal 2023 will need to have a significant increase in fiscal year 2025, which is going to be higher than what is on a Prop 218, and we have to probably do another Prop 218 at that time.
Well, that would be true whether we do a rate increase this year or not.
Yeah.
So that's assuming some things that we don't know right now.
Yes.
All right.
So if you have no questions, I'm going to go to the next one, which is the staff rate recommendation. So this is the staff recommended rate. So this is more to smooth out the increase. So we are recommending because anything that you do each year impacts the future years, because that's based on what the rates are. So if we do a 2% increase in 2023, maintain a 2.6 in 2024, so it's a similar results than the zero rate increase, except that the increase that's projected for 2025 is from 9% to 6.5%, which is a less increase in the future years. But that also have you meet the 1.5% required debt service coverage. So again, on this slide right here, you can show at the bottom, you can see at the bottom of the slide how it's barely meeting that 1.5 target that we're trying to accomplish. So again, all of this, the rate recommendation is based on if we're going to go through with the loan with USBR.
Right, which isn't it's not all or nothing, it's potentially partial.
This is an example of what I was talking about before, where if you look at what's the weak leg of the stool, and it's the debt service coverage. So all of these rate numbers for all 5 years are focused on get it to 1.5, which is the weakest part of this. When you look at the ending reserves and you see that the target reserve hovers between 35 and 40 million, and unassigned reserve is over 10 million above that, you say, well, why do we need to do a rate increase? And it is because of the expected requirements of taking on these loans, these irrigation loans, which we don't have the final details to, but we're just projecting based upon what we know so far.
And staff has provided a map of where those projects are located. I just have not sent it out to the board yet. I'll send it out as soon as I can.
Hey, Kerry, you mentioned that if we went to 9% in, I think it was 2025, that it was beyond the existing Prop 218. Could you just remind me how long that Prop 218 goes out for, and if the 6.5% increase under the second alternative falls within that Prop 218 authorization?
So it is 2.6% all throughout until fiscal year 2026. So if we have a 6% in 2025, we're going to have to do a new Prop 218 because that's more than what was previously approved, which was only at 2.6 for the 5 years.
Okay, thank you. Great, thank you.
Even though it's isn't it cumulative?
No,
Or it's per year?
there's a per year rate.
So even though you said that you were going to raise rates 2 to 3% for every year for the next 5 years, and you didn't do any of those, right?
Right, you can't do it all. You can't catch up all in one year.
Yeah,
Can't
can't
catch
go
up
off
all
the
in one
max,
year.
yeah.
Right.
But the difference between the 2.6 and the 6% will make you over, even if it's a cumulative rate, it'll be over what was approved on the 2025.
Yeah, but
That shouldn't discourage us from that. That shouldn't push us over.
the 218 is not just percents. I mean, it
It's a
says the
flat
rate's going to be
It's-
at $1 next year, $2 the next year, $3 the next year.
That's correct. There
So
are dollar amounts.
so if you keep it at $1 for the first 2 years, you can still go to $3 in the third year.
That's correct.
Oh, that is all at once.
And we
Told
just
me
talked,
differently.
No, you
sorry.
can't go to, if it's $1 a year, you can't skip the first year, skip the second year, and then in the third year where it's supposed to be $3, you can't do more than $3. You can't make up the
Right.
previous years where you didn't increase.
Right. But you can still go to the
Each year
3.
you've got a maximum rate.
No, but you can always go up to that maximum
Yes, you can go up
regardless
to
of what you did the prior year.
Yeah.
and
I
we
think
just,
that was
we
right.
talk in terms of percentages because that is what everyone can relate to more than dollar amounts.
But the dollar amount is what,
It is the
The
max.
dollar amount is what
Yeah,
Prop 218
you can always go to the
authorizes.
maximum dollar amount in each year of whatever was written on the 218.
But and also, if we just, let's just assume we're gonna do the 68.4, it's not gonna start until 2024, correct? Right? And we're not going to use all that money right away, so we're not gonna be paying 3 million. I mean, you're assuming that the increase, right? I mean, you're assuming that the increase for 2025
you only have 3 years to use the money.
would be but if we don't start till 2024, you're assuming that that we're gonna use all that money and start paying the debt service back in 2025, which is $3 million, which triggers the 9%.
So if, it depends on when we actually sign the agreement. So the 3-year time goes from the time that we sign the agreement. So if we do intend to sign the whole 68.4 million, for example, and we sign it in July, we have 3 years from 2022 to complete it. So by 2025, we have to make sure that we've already spent that $68.4 million. So even if there is the 3 million, you're right. If we don't use the whole thing in 2024, maybe the 3 million will be 1.5 million or 2 million, depends on how much we
You know,
draw.
they,
3 years to start the projects, not 3 years to start and finish.
It's 3 years from the time you
To start
sign
and
the
finish.
agreement. Yeah.
that sounds like it's too quick. We're going to need more time to do all these
That
projects.
can't be right.
We can investigate that. I mean, we have been able to extend monies with USDA, which is another federal agency. So, you know, we'll just have to wait and see what the process is once they get it nailed down. But right now, we're being told 3 years is what we have.
To start the project.
Start and finish.
Start and
Finish.
finish, yeah.
I think she's saying start and finish.
Start, finish
And
from
Carrie
last
in the back is saying no. So I've got,
Yeah, I don't see how you can do that in 3 years. It's just way too fast.
yeah, Carrie Oliphant, if you would like to help clarify this, maybe? Or at least provide input.
know, it could be 90 days, could be 120 days. Till we have that agreement, we don't know what the conditions are.
Right.
So to be saying we have to spend the money in 3 years, I'm not sure where that's coming from because they don't know that yet.
No, I understand that. And as this process, unfolds, we should probably try to relate to them that 3 years is really quick. We're going to need, these are, not
Right,
projects that
and-
we can just go buy something off the shelf. They have
And
to be,
when we applied for these funds, we provided them with a schedule.
yeah.
So our 5-year CIP reflects what the schedule was when we applied for the funds. So
Okay, good.
this is brand new. This is not something that we've done with the Bureau before. I don't even think that they've done it because they don't even have template agreements.
Yeah,
So
okay. Good luck.
Yeah, this is part of the negotiation. I mean, from my perspective, what we would be looking at is a staggering of the launch of projects. And I would expect they would have a 3-year requirement for completion of each set of projects as they go forward. And we haven't even had discussions about bandwidth and can staff handle managing all these projects. But our financing perception is that we can negotiate this and we can explain to them that the staggered nature of moving forward with these projects would say some of them start in 23 to finish within 3 years. Some of them start in 24 to finish in 3 years, et cetera. And we have a ramp up. But as President Powell rightly already mentioned, we're focused on 23 right now. And we're just trying to give you our best look forward to the next 4 years. But for 23, this project specifically isn't driving this 2% rate. But it is prudent to be doing that to level out what's going to happen in the future.
Yeah. I mean, I don't get the sense of urgency. I see what you're doing. I mean, it's 2%'s not a huge number, but I just don't, I think we're making some assumptions. You're trying to cover the worst case scenario, I think, and we may not need to do that. I don't blame you for wanting to cover you kind of have to do that. But we have time, I guess is what I'm thinking.
We have time. I mean, there's a lot of assumptions that we see how government works and all this funding. It takes a long time. And to assume that by 2025, we're going to be, having $3 million of debt coverage. I get what you guys are trying to do, but, we have to, you guys got to realize that the public comes to you and says, why do we have a rate increase? And I need to explain it in detail, and I need to have good reasons. And I can't just say, because we have projects that are coming and they want to know when. Well, it could be 2 years, could be 3 years. It's not good enough sometimes.
Well, I think, as Carrie Oliphant has said, these projects were selected off of an existing 5-year CIP. So we know when we're going to do the projects. And the projects were selected from many projects that basically provide a service out to the community. And we all know, especially the users of that service, know that system is in dire need of repair. There are failures in that system more than there are in any other system we operate. The fact that we have an opportunity here to use very low interest rate loans is kind of a gift. We could do a lot more out there than 68.4 million.
No, I agree.
I think,
I agree, they're just
and
not.
so, the fact that the ramp up of work that staff can do will be reflected in the highest rate that finance is projecting in 2025, whether it's 2025 at 6.5 or 2026 at 8.4. I think the board has an opportunity here to improve the reliability of that system using someone else's money, but there is a cost.
I understand that, okay, but listen, 0 rate increase, we have 564 days of cash in hand, and we have $52 million reserve, okay? That's what the public sees, period, okay? I understand the projects are coming, they'll come, and when they come, then we're gonna raise the rates.
Then we'll pay for them.
But this is crazy. I mean, I
It's only 2% crazy. It's not that
it's
crazy.
still a rate increase.
19% was crazy.
I know what you guys are saying.
I don't
It's
think it
just
was ever
someone has to
19% for
be
Canal.
logical.
I don't know. I don't remember.
No.
I don't save those. Okay. Well, so I think we understand at least what the scenarios are for Canal.
So, I mean, I think, I'll stop here, but with a 0% this year, we're forecasting a 9.5 in 2 years. With a 2% this year, we're forecasting a 6.5 in 2 years. Now, it may not be 9.5, and it may not be 6.5, but it may be 7.5, and it may be 5.5. So we've got an industry out there that is sensitive to rate increases. So it would seem prudent to me to take the opportunity now to make that future rate increase less, I don't know, climatic. But,
Maybe.
I'm not involved in that
Maybe.
industry. I'm just trying to.
But we do have these excess unassigned reserves. I mean, it's just, there's no,
But it's the debt coverage.
no, we're okay on debt coverage.
No, not with the no rate increase.
We just don't know how much of a rate increase we're going to need to do in that third year, and it's a lot of assumptions that go into it. So yeah, do a small one now that softens it. I understand that. No matter what, it will. But I don't. Personally, I don't think it's necessary. I mean, it's not necessary. Financially, it's not necessary. It's just that you're going to end up with a bigger increase later. We just don't know how much that's going to be. Yeah.
So our goal is, so what we've kind of done here is presenting to you to 0 and what we'd recommend, again, more to smoothing out. But it is the board's directive to let us know if they wanted to go for the 0. It's just, we're just letting you know the potential impacts of it if we do a 0%.
Yeah, understood.
increase.
Okay.
Well, and we're also recognizing that these processes take time when you're dealing with these federal agencies. So
Yeah.
we're not going to have a certainty of where that's going by the time we're adopting the budget for next year and the rates. So,
Well, not this month or next month, but a year from now we will.
yes, but what I'm saying is this. If, to Jim's point, if you want to moderate the spike for the future, yes, we can go with a 0 rate increase, and then your decision point is if you're proceeding with accepting the extremely low-cost loan money, then you're going to have consequences that you need
Right.
to,
Yeah. It may be
Response.
a bigger one later. I
yeah.
understand.
And that's fine, if that's what the board's comfortable with.
Okay, moving on.
Yeah. We'll raise rates when we need the money.
Okay?
Yeah. We don't need it right now.
This next one should be easy, no rate increase.
So moving on to Wes. Okay. So under West Replenishment Fund, so one of the primary, so we did go through, we don't have any other recommendation except for the 0% that was directed by the board. We were able to do that by moving the State Water Plant allocation back to State Water Project Fund. We did decrease the repayment to domestic from 8 million to 3.5 million. And again, of course, the supplemental water, the use of supplemental water charge for that one project helps as well. So with that recommendation, we are able to meet the target. And I'll go to the next slide so actually you can see the impacts of the zero rate percent increase. So we don't have any debt, outside external debt for WES. And it appears like there's no planned, at least in the next 5 years, there's no planned external debt for it, so that was not taken into consideration. If you can look at the all-in debt service coverage, none of these rate increases will meet that, but there's no need to meet that because we only have internal debt, which is to repay the domestic fund. You do have a strong cash on hand in fiscal 2023, but it does start depleting that in the future years.
Can I just ask one question?
Uh-huh.
For the operating expenses for 2024, jumps from 23 to 35. What is that? Am I missing that? What is that?
So that is putting back the GLC Rio Bravo, because we only got the notice that we're not going to be delivering water this year, but that can change in the future years. So we're going to, like what we mentioned before, we're going to have to reevaluate each year. The water purchase is one of the areas that's very hard to forecast, to predict. So that's still taking into consideration that the Rio Bravo is going to be delivered in the future years. We only took it away in 2023 when we got confirmation we were not going to get those deliveries.
So for 23, the savings is $8 million by not doing that purchase because it's not available. And it'll be more than 8 million in 24 because the rate is scheduled to go up each year.
If it's available.
If it's available.
Yeah.
And you're right, but
So you're plugging that in there to see if it's available.
we're assuming the worst case scenario for financials from a water point of view. It's the best case scenario.
Yeah.
Right? So we know that we're going to have this same exact discussion a year from now regarding West. Because it's so dramatic if you don't have that purchase, then that really changes the whole prop.
And we have to assume, you're right, to assume that we're
Yes.
going to have that.
Yeah. And the other point here to Director Nelson's question on Canal, all of these, the rate assumptions that are built in here for the future years, it stays under the current Prop 218 authorization through 26. So you would not need to do a new Prop 218 under these assumptions.
Okay.
Okay. Go on to the East. So the East Replenishment Fund, we do have two scenarios. The first scenario is a zero rate increase on the first year, but there is a significant increase in 2024, which then that's going to require us to do a new Prop 218 at that point because the rate increase for the future years were 3%. So we're going to try to look at the numbers as well. So the primary drivers for this is that 2.1 final debt repayment to domestic. So this is the final payment in 2023. There's no other internal payment in the future years. And then this is when the debt repayment for the COP, the Oasis bond, starts in 2023, which is at 1.2. So this one, this recommendation right here, the reason why we're not recommending the zero is because in the future years, you're going to have to adopt a higher 2024 just to meet the target. So if you look at this sheet right here, if you look at the unassigned reserved on fiscal 2024, you only have $22,000, which is you're almost not meeting target without that 10% in 2024, with a 0% increase in 2023. And we have to meet, there is a mandatory, because we have an Oasis bond that we issued, we have to meet that minimum debt service coverage, which we're able to meet still with a zero at 1.53. But we do have to take into consideration the not meeting the target in the future years with a 0%.
Carrie, you talk about an extra discretionary tax allocation. item. And I was trying to find it somewhere in the budget numbers, but I couldn't. What is that? And
Oh.
can we quantify that, or can you
Yes.
explain that?
So it's actually on, I didn't have it on the packet, but it's that property tax. So we have a discretionary tax is about $20 million a year. We're estimating about 20 million in the upcoming year to 2023. And each year we go through and then we recommend how to allocate that discretionary tax based on the needs of the funds. So what's allocated to the east is to make sure that we have enough discretionary tax to cover the payments for the debt service payment. That's part of the packet on the COP.
Okay, thank you.
That was a significant part of the analysis that was done as we were looking at issuing the OASIS certificates of participation, was how do we guarantee, without handcuffing ourselves, that there would be adequate amounts of money for debt service there without, again, having some mechanism in place that handcuffed us from doing something different than the original plan. So we committed to be starting with putting taxes into this fund in the amount equal to the debt service year by year for 30 years, outside of all of the other needs of the fund. So we kind of look at it as two separate components within a fund, and we had to commit that we would be doing that assignment. It's like off the top. First claim of the 20 million goes towards debt service, so that lenders are guaranteed they're going to get their money. And then the rest is subject to balancing within the needs of the fund versus other funds.
Okay, that makes sense. Thanks, Jeff.
Jeff, what was that number again? Is that, what's that number just for this year? Is that 3 million? I'm sorry, I missed it.
I don't have it with me. Darren, are you on the line, and do you have that handy?
Yeah, I believe it's 1.99.
Yeah, I remember. It's not substantial. But yeah, and thank you for kind of giving that background, Jeff. I think it's important for Director Aguilar to be aware of that, and you know how that came about, and the amount of time that we try to come up with something that would work in order to move that OASIS project forward. So thank you for providing those details. And you know, while we're on that topic, I think that, you know, one of the things that you'll point to about this fund is you'll say, I think you have it on the PowerPoint on probably one of the slides related to this fund. You say, you know, we're required to have that 1.5 times ratio because of the debt that we owe. And so, you know, that I think in some other funds you're increasing the rates because you're trying to get to that 1.5 like canal. You're saying if we go after the money, then we know we need to have a 1.5 times coverage ratio. So we're trying to raise rates to get to the 1.5. I think you're at the 1.5 for the East Replenishment Fund because you already took the loan. But other than that, why would you need to increase it to 2.6 or higher?
So this is looking at the 5 years. So wanted to take a note that the debt service payment up to 2027 is about 1.2 because we have not been paying principal, it's all interest. So in effective 2028, the debt service payment is going to be about $2.9 million because that's when we start paying off the interest. So it's kind of looking forward as well when we're considering some of the fiscal impacts that we do each year. So that's why it was recommended at this point. But again, each year we have to look at it. We're always pushing back future years when we're doing analysis on the fiscal impact.
Okay, but But Carrie, given the fact that the fund is going to completely pay off the Tommy Salivi payment, going to take off that burden, which, I don't know, a few millions a year, which now can stay in the fund. It doesn't need to be accounted for as expenses. And then if the understanding is that the payment that we need to be making to the loan for the Oasis project is coming from the property taxes, then other than those things, what other projects, which you're showing here in the forecast, are driving the need to create so much revenue?
So if you look at fiscal year 2024 forecast, without that 10% rate increase, you're going to be below target. So because you have been depleting we have been depleting the reserves. So if you look at fiscal year 2024, your target reserve is 6.446 million. And your ending is already 6.468. So you're barely meeting that target. So you're really, part of this is also taking consideration that we have to make sure that each year we meet that target reserves.
Why do we need that target? So the question is, why do we need that target if we're at the 1.5 debt service coverage, we're above the 150 days cash on hand? Why does our target need to be 2.67 debt coverage, 228 days cash on hand?
So the target reserve is based on the reserve policy that the board has approved, and it covers your operating expenses. You need to keep 90 days worth of operating expenses in there. You have your emergency fund, you have your rate stabilization fund, and you have your capital reserves, which is part of that reserve policy. So the target reserve is to meet the reserve policy that has been approved by the board.
Okay, well then I guess my comment would be that I think that's extremely high. I don't see why we need 228 days of cash on hand or a 2.67 debt coverage ratio. I just don't see it.
I don't think I think what Carrie is saying is neither of those factors is driving the increase. What's driving the increase is the board's reserve policy, which staff
And that's
has
what
to
I'm saying.
adhere to.
My response is that seems high.
Well, but that's what the board has set the policy at.
Sure, and that's my response is that I think it's high, and that's my comment.
Yeah, well, that's something that we can look at.
In the future.
So it's not driving a rate increase this year, it would be driving it next
In the
year. So
future,
if we, that gives us plenty of time to look at that reserve. If we need to change it, we can change it.
Yeah.
And that's why, when you look at the future years, we're looking at expecting zero increases, is that issue of the reserve is remedied absent any future projects.
How much revenue per year does that 10% generate?
If the revenues are 100% off of the rates, then that would be 1.4 million, is that correct?
Well,
Doesn't look like one. If you just look on slide 18, which shows the 10% increase between the 2023 budget and the 2024 forecast,
Less than $1 million, yeah.
it looks like 600,000.
Yeah.
yeah, but then revenue goes down the following year, so
Well,
there's other things in there.
My question is, why do we have to pay the 2.1 million back next year? Why does it have to be done next year?
Because that was part of when we applied for the East Oasis bond. That was part of the consideration that we were going to clean up all the internal, that we have no other debt service payment except for this East Oasis, and that was part of the.
That's in the contract that it has to be paid next year, or that we have a schedule that pays it off.
No, it's not required, but it is part of the whole process that went into the ratings of the
that's what we told them we'd do.
instrument before we borrowed the money, and when we reaffirmed the AA minus rate, when we got a reaffirmation of the AA minus rating a few months ago, was with the understanding we are sticking to the plan. And they were looking at these next years as being the critical ones. If you stay the course on the plan in these early years, then the pressure is off in the future. But there was a concern. Are you still going to do what you said you were going to do when you got your initial rating? You did your initial borrowing of these monies, and we did get our $50 million to get this project done. So it doesn't mean anything as far as violating a covenant, but it certainly is not helpful to our financial reputation for this fund and in general. So
It also, I mean, what the financial plan has done is designated certain revenue streams to pay back expenses. And in the plan we developed, this particular loan was paid back using certain revenue streams. We don't pay it all back now. It creates a problem. It potentially creates a problem in the future because that revenue stream is already allocated for something else.
and it also impacts the other fund, domestic.
And
The
further
bottom
to,
line is, if you don't raise the rates, it's just like it's just like the canal fund, that next year could be a 10% increase if you don't.
Well, that's what we
That's
would be
what we're
seeing
seeing.
based upon what we're looking at right now.
yeah, that's.
Yeah, you know, I mean,
I disagree. I would disagree with that. That's just my opinion, but I disagree with that. I mean, you're removing
We just need some.
the payment that you have for the Tommy C. Lacey. I just don't see.
So further to add to Jeff's comment is we do get a reaffirmation of our credit rating each year. So that gets looked into as well. So they do again, what Darren has expressed is all those factors that they look at each year to reaffirm our rates. So it affects our future borrowings if we do need to borrow in the future for this fund as well. So if I can go to the next slide, which is what the staff recommended, is to kind of smooth it out. Rather than having the 0, is having the 4 and the 3, and then no rate increases projected in the future years is what we're recommending, because it does kind of smooth out the rate increase as opposed to a huge 10% in 2024. So I'll go to the next slide so you can see the impacts of that as well. And to address the comment of President Powell about the operating revenues going down in 2025, so we did put in estimates on the drought. We did very conservative, the impacts of the governor's mandate of the drought restrictions. So we did adjust the consumption, but very conservatively to kind of get it back down to what the mandate would be. We don't know what it is, but we need to anticipate it.
yeah, no, that's fine. The real answer I'm looking for is for that 10%, how much additional revenue does 10% generate?
It's not that significant. It was about 600,000.
850,000? I mean, you know the production, and so you can, 850,000 per year. So getting back to Vice President Estrada's comment, just sort of adding to that, if the target reserves were a little bit less, you would, I mean, by 25, even if you didn't have that 850 a year, that would be 1.7 million over 2 years. You'd still, well, you'd really just have that 110%, right? Mm-hmm. You're 850,000 a year. If you take that out of, I'm looking at slide 18. Hang on. Yeah. Take that out, $850,000. You're still positive. The only thing that happens is your target reserve, your actual reserve would be a little less. It might be around 6 million or maybe a little below 6 million, but it would pop back up again.
Yes.
I mean, the future years are still positive without that increase.
And I'm thinking it's positive, President Powell, because of the fact that we're paying off the Tommy C. Levy, right? I mean, that money there. Is that a factor?
Well, if you do it in 1 year versus two, I mean, you're still going to do it all before that rate increase really has much of an impact. But I think you can
Sure,
pay,
but-
I think you can pay off the loan and not do the rate increase. If-
Oh, yeah, I
if we-
agree.
If we can convince ourselves that we can live with, $5.5 million target for 1 year, because it's going to still
Yeah, no,
pop
that's-
back up the next year.
Yeah, that's exactly how I'm looking at it. It's gonna pop back up, and I'm thinking it pops back up because as soon as you finish paying off the debt, then you don't have that expense, you keep it in the fund.
I don't know that you keep it in the fund.
So where does it go?
Keep what in the fund?
I don't recall right now what the source of revenue was for paying that back, but I suspect it was either the East RAC revenue or it was the discretionary income tax. Discretionary income tax then is moved back out of the East RAC to either the West or domestic. I can't recall the details, but
Is there a plan to do that?
planned out to do.
Are you
We
sure?
put this together previously. And if you want to adjust the target reserve or the reserve target, that's fine. It just takes a board action to do that.
Yeah, and I mean, all I'm saying is you don't really have to change anything. If you
You'll hit it anyway.
if you don't do the 10% in that 1 year, fiscal '24, then you dip below your target for that 1 year, probably part of that year, actually, and then you're back up the next year.
Well, if you don't increase, so the future years is based on what the rate increases in 2024. So it will not go up as much as it's showing here because this is assuming that there is that
Yeah,
10% rate increase.
and-
No, I understand that, but,
Yeah.
but those 3 years that you show, 25, 26, 27, are all zeros in this projection.
So we have operated in the past that it is not staff doesn't have the ability to put together a financial plan that violates the board policy on target reserves. What you're asking us to do now is to violate that policy.
Right. And it would be for a very short period of time.
Any difference, we can't put together a
So then
plan.
we'll change the reserve.
That's all I'm saying you have to do.
Yeah.
But staff doesn't have that ability.
I thought
With board approval, they do.
I thought we did
So
something.
we haven't done the approval yet.
I thought we did something to where we gave the staff flexibility to dip below the target reserve. Didn't we work on
I thought we had that in domestic, and then we knew that it was going to come back up, so we were okay with it.
We did that,
You have
right? Where we gave them,
Yeah, we did that.
Yeah, you
Gave
have
ourselves
it
like a
3
grace
years.
period.
I thought we did that for all the funds in case this ever came up, but was just for domestic.
No, there's some language in the reserve policy that says as long as you have a plan to get it back up, you can
Yes,
dip
3
below it.
Oh, then we
So
don't have to.
without the 10%, so we did do that. Without the 10%, it doesn't recover. That positive reserve does not come back into 3 years. So.
Sure it does.
So we're gonna,
Because you have you go positive, 25 adds another 2 million, almost 1.9 million of cash flow. So if you pull the 850 out of there, you're still adding over $1 million each year. That more than covers the 850 you didn't have.
but then you're gonna have, get into future years, you're gonna have that principal payment that you have to repay for the east, because this one's all interest right now, and then it pops back up.
I'm assuming that's already in your,
Yeah.
in the slide, right? It's got to be. It's already in there.
Well, I mean, we can move on. We've got
Yeah.
a couple other things we got to do today, plus we still got to get through domestic, and there's a hard stop at 4 o'clock.
So I'll go jump to domestic at this.
Yes.
Okay, so for the domestic, we did the 0 rate increase again on,
increase in these.
so for this one right here, for the domestic, we cannot propose to have a 0 rate increase at this point because we do not meet our debt covenant requirements. And we do have 2 outstandings right now with State Water Resource Board. We have Highway 86, and we have the, also the upcoming for USDA loan, which is the North Shore, Del Kyler. So, and we have that short-term note that we issued as well. So we have to meet that minimum debt service coverage requirement. So part of that is, it includes the 3.5 million infusion from the west and the 2.1 from the east. Also taking into consideration all the grant revenues to cover most of the projects, so this is very limited pay-go as well. So this is the results. If you look even just on the net operating income, we do not have sufficient operating revenues to cover our operating expenses. We are at a loss each year, and that drives down your cash flow. You have a decreased cash flow each year, and you have a negative all debt in debt service coverage. So staff cannot recommend a 0% rate increase in domestic at this point.
Isn't this what we're looking at, a zero rate increase where it says that? You can't recommend it, but this is what you're showing us.
Yes, it's a 0 rate increase.
What it would look like.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I'll go on to the next slide of what we're recommending. I apologize for the heading on this slide, on slide 23. That's supposed to be staff recommended. I did not get to change that heading.
That's okay.
So we are proposing, if we do the 5%, it does smooth out the future years. So Prop 218 had us at 5. Again, it depends on the dollars, but the 5%, 11, 9, and 7. But this one kind of smooths it out to 9% the next 2 years and then 8% in 2026. So it has the same primary drivers that we talked about, and this is how the results are in terms of making that recommendation of a 5%, minimum 5%.
What is the 3.5 million based on? Is that a?
That's what's coming from us. That's the debt repayment from the.
No, I know that, but I mean, where does, is that a fixed number or based on some sort of amortization schedule or?
We were trying to do like a 30-year payment plan.
It's nothing's
but
fixed
it's
on it.
just nothing's fixed. We
Okay,
can
so
change
nothing's
that.
fixed, okay.
Yeah,
When was the last 218 put out?
last year.
And we want to do another one?
No.
No.
What we're saying,
Sorry, go ahead.
what we're saying with the other funds is based upon the trends, it looked like we were going to have issues in canal beginning in '24. And
You're right.
so, but domestic, this is really the most vulnerable fund, frankly. And this is the one where our recommendations are holding as close to the Prop 218 as you see in any of the funds. The original Prop 218 that was approved last year is 5.5.11.9.7. We did that first 5 for the year we're finishing now. As you see here, we think that we can do this leveled out approach of doing the second 5. If we do the second 5 this year, then we can lower it, smooth it out to 998 in the following 3 years. But again, we're just focusing on 1 year at a time. But 23 is such a linchpin year. This was what we kind of were basing all of our assumptions on for the future years, that 22 and 23 would both be 5s.
And so what we're looking at, the 5, 11, 9, and 7, that is exactly what we sent out in the 218 notices.
Yes, that line on the top there is what was sent out in the notices last year, and that's the currently, it's the percentage reflection of the dollar rates that were approved by the board. But these percentages represent the revenue increase.
Okay,
For
so let's
those
go
years.
back to zero rate increase and see what that looks like and why we, what's the,
Well, the operating expense going negative for all these years is going to be very impactful to our ratings. We have debt currently is existing out there for domestic. We have future needs. This would be serious if we did a 0 in 23.
So Jeff, how are we ever going to get, if you go to slide 24, how are we ever going to get that unassigned reserve to a smaller number? I mean, it just, that, you know, this is the problem, is, you know, that cash is in the bank, and we're saying we don't really need it, right? Because it's above our target. And yet we're saying because of these agreements we've made, we're forced to raise rates, which means it perpetuates that excess unassigned reserve. Sure would be nice if we could whittle that thing down to get it back in line, you know, to be smaller instead of bigger.
Well, I guess we could do more capital projects, because it's the operating expense that creates a problem, if I read this correct now.
That's correct, but
So,
it's essentially use of one-time funds, which is going to,
Hurt our ability to borrow cheaply. So you, right?
but maybe, yeah.
Right,
I know.
so instead of borrowing,
that-
so you may be
a trade-off.
a few.
It's gonna grow even more.
But we're doing better in that.
Right,
it's that trade-off.
Our execution rates are.
that trade-off.
Right.
Oh, okay. Which, I mean, that's, I don't know, that's not, in today's day and age, that may not be a bad trade-off with gambling. I mean, that's what we're not saying that we can't borrow money. What we're saying is that it may hurt our chances of borrowing money at the cheapest rate.
So let's,
Someone's always gonna give us money, because, this is a public utility, which is, you just raise the rates.
super solid, yeah, so let's just look at 1 year, all right? This year that's in front of us right now for domestic. If we do a 0 rate increase, you're gonna have this scenario on slide 22. Just look at the 1 year, because the rest of it looks really scary, but this one doesn't look quite as scary. What's the problem? I mean, what is the consequence of doing this for that 1 year?
You do not meet your debt service coverage. You have a negative debt service.
Okay, and so we get a letter from somebody that says you need to do something different? What's, I mean, really, what's the consequence?
Well, can't they call the bonds if we go below these thresholds?
Well, right now we have a.
So
note-
Jeff,
so go
Jeff
ahead,
and
go ahead.
Carrie?
Yeah, go ahead, Darren.
Sorry, I just wanted to weigh in there. So within the domestic water bonds that were sold, one of the covenants that is typical and that we entered into with investors is that every year we would set rates and charges so that we met a minimum debt service coverage of 1.25 times. And so if we violated that covenant, there could be potential legal ramifications related to that, but we would need to check that with counsel. But that's
Okay.
kind of the genesis behind what Carrie's talking about, that minimum. We have
okay.
covenanted
All right, well then-
holders to meet that.
So that brings me to the next question. If you go to slide 24, it puts us above 1.25, right? It gets you to 1.68. Is there a rate between 0 and 5% increase that gets you closer to 1.25? And what would that be?
We did test that. Oh my God. We did test that about 3 or 4%, but it's very narrow. It gets it down to 1.4. So it at a minimum, the 5% is what meets at the 1.68. We did try to do some rate changes on it. At the lowest, we could probably take it is at 4, and that would take it down at 1.49, barely meeting the 1.5 target for debt service coverage.
But he just said we need 1.25, not 1.5.
We're trying to maintain the cost of service recommendation of 1.5. Again, we have future borrowings that's in the line as well. So for example, our USDA is looking at how we're going to be responding under rate increase. Even though they've approved it, we have not, it's on the letter of conditions. That's part of the financial. So like for example, USDA, we had to submit them a 5-year plan. And we did put in some of the, we implemented a prop.
So a 4% rate increase for this year gets you just under 1.5?
Under 1.5.
Okay.
But a 5% increase this year avoids an 11% increase next year.
Sure, yes.
Assuming
We're
lots of
trying to-
things, yeah. No, I know.
That's all we can do at this point. They're just estimates.
All right. I think I understand. Thank you.
So that's the last slide that we have.
Okay.
So, next, unless there are any further questions, I don't know, Director Nelson's been, sorry, sir.
He's been listening.
Stepping outside my lane.
I don't,
So
We're a team.
are we would be looking for some direction on where the majority of the board would be comfortable.
You know, personally, I mean, I could do 4, so we're not going to go get the book thrown at us if we do 4% instead of 5% from our people, you know, whatever they do to us. I don't want to get us in trouble. I mean, this is a whole new thing, this debt.
If we thought we could do 4, we would have recommended 4, but
Why can't we do 4?
Because it's less than 1.5. But it's greater than 1.25.
It's a
Get that.
hair below 1.5. You said 1.48 or
I mean,
what?
it's like assuming that everything is on target.
Yeah.
No, that's not true.
Probably not going to spend all of your CapEx. You're going to end up with more cash at the end of the year anyways.
Right now, I have the board at 0 on Canal, 0 on West, 0 on East, and 4.5.
The CapEx, the lack of spending on CapEx doesn't help you.
Doesn't help that ratio, but
Doesn't help
it's
that
still, I told you earlier, I'm concerned about this unassigned reserve continuing to balloon.
I just want to say that the CapEx for the domestic water fund, specifically in domestic water, we only have 1.2 million using ratepayer funds. There's about 3.4 million of the domestic water fund that's being applied to general district to cover the general district projects. So there's not a lot of.
So it's not a big number.
Ratepayer
Even if we're
funds.
80%, it's not going to generate much.
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
I get it.
I
I
just
think it
want,
needs to be looked at a little bit. I don't understand exactly all of what you're saying on these bonds and the way it's done. He says 1.25, you say 1.5. I mean, there's a lot of things thrown out, and then we find out that maybe they're not true, or maybe they're true. I mean, not to say that anybody's trying to mislead anybody. I don't think you guys are doing that at all. I think you guys are trying to give us the best path forward. But I think we need to find out a little bit more before we. I mean, people are very sensitive to rates right now. There's water restrictions going. There may be more. If there's a way around raising the rate at all for domestic, we raised it last year, and we raised it the year before, didn't we? So.
I don't have the history.
Well, I remember we raised it last year.
We did 5%.
5% for the year we're in.
Yeah.
So we have environmental services has an action item that we need to move on with, and then we have a closed session.
Yeah, I mean, can we get a little more direction from the board on this? I mean, I'm hearing anywhere from 0 to something a little between 4 and 5.
4.5.
President Powell,
Go ahead.
do we dip below the 1.5? Well, it sounds like we do, because even with the 4%, you're saying we dipped to 1.48. So if we do no rate increase on domestic, how much do we dip? Is it substantially more, or is it close to the 1.4?
No rate increases on slide 22, which is negative 4.93.
Okay, yeah, that kind of seems like we'll get the book thrown at us.
Yeah, I don't think I would support that either. 4.2, 4.1, I don't know, something like that.
So we bring the rates back to the board on June
14th, yeah.
June 14th.
June 14th. And that's when we'll ask you to vote on the rates so that we can crank them into the budget on the last meeting in June, which would be the 28th. So unless you'd like to have another study
Yeah,
session.
can you bring it back with a showing what gets you to 1.5 debt coverage? That, it's going to be for domestic. So we're zeros on everything except domestic, but can you tell us what the number is to get us to the 1.5?
1.5, okay,
It's 4.1. I don't know. It's something like that.
okay.
And then what is our reserve, what is the board policy reserve target?
For, each fund has a different, each fund has a
It
different.
depends on your, it's, your operating, it has different.
4.2.
Yeah, 25%
components.
for your operating expenses, so it fluctuates from fund to fund.
I can send the current policy out to the board.
All right, let's move on.
Can we just see that before we make our vote?
Yes.
So this will all come, so the rate increase recommendation to keep the debt coverage under 1.5 will come back on the presentation on June 14th. We'll send the current reserve policy out to the board. And if you want to make an adjustment before that meeting, if you want to make an adjustment at that meeting on the 14th or the 28th, we can agendize that. And I think that covers the to-do list for this item.
Yeah, I think we covered it well.
Hey.
Thank you.
Hey, John,
Yes.
John, I should probably make a comment. I'm not going to be able to attend the 6/14, the 14th of June meeting, but I'm after this presentation and so forth, I'm all in on the zero increases on the East Canal and West, and whatever the 4 X is to get us to the 1.5 in the all-in debt service coverage. I'm in for all that.
Thank you, Director Nelson.
So you're going to vote remotely?
Proxy? No, you can't make it at all.
Okay. Thank you. Well, yeah, but at least we know. I like to know those things,
He's not going to be here.
No, I know, but at least we know where you would stand if you were here. All right, so on to, we do have an action item for environmental services as far as authorizing publication of these notices. And I think you have a pretty good idea of what they're going to say, right, Zoe?
So, good afternoon, President Powell, members of the board. Just for the record, if the direction is zero for both east and west, and it is already zero for Mission, there's no need to have a public hearing, and so therefore we would not be mailing any notices.
All right, does this require action? I guess if we're not doing it.
If we needed a rate, yes.
Yeah,
If I
we needed
may-
a rate.
Yeah, go ahead.
Hi, John, this is Jeff Foray. I would just mention that there needs to be some board action to determine that you're not going to do it and keep them both at zero, and therefore not to move forward with the public hearing.
Okay,
So yes, some action one way
All
or
right.
the other. Mr.
So on
President,
this item, I'll
would be
make
recommended.
yeah, good, thanks, Jeff. On this item, I'll make a motion that we, in light of zero rate increases for these funds, that we do not publish and mail notices.
I will second that motion, Director Nelson.
Good. Roll call vote, please.
President Powell,
Aye.
Vice President Estrada,
Aye.
Director Bianco,
Aye.
Director Aguilar,
Aye.
and Director Nelson.
Aye.
Thank you,
Thank
that passed 5-0. Oh, see, we just saved some money.
Some more money.
So I don't see any further business on the open calendar, so this time we'll adjourn into closed session to address items 5A and B. We will reconvene here in open session to report out once we complete those.
And Mr. President, since that's being handled by your special counsel, and I doubt that there will be reportable action, I will defer to you to make that report, and then I will not join the closed session.
Okay, Jeff, thank you.
All right, thank you all.
Good. So, yeah, good. The regular meeting is reconvened. We have no reportable action from closed session, and with no further business, we are adjourned.